You won't believe what happened after Liora began dreaming of the same mysterious man night after night. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, until she started finding pieces of those dreams in the real world. Symbols, voices, memories that weren't hers. And then, one stormy evening, he showed up at her door. The line between dreams and reality is thinner than you think, and for Liora, it was about to shatter. Would you trust someone who only ever existed in your sleep? Welcome to our YouTube channel. Before diving into this extraordinary tale, take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe. Your support helps us bring you more intriguing stories like this. Now, let's uncover the truth behind Liora's haunting dreams, the mysterious man who kept appearing in them, and what happened the moment he knocked on her door. It started on the night of the first full moon in March, when the sea winds howled louder than usual and the power flickered in Liora's small seaside cottage like it was reacting to something ancient stirring. She had gone to bed late, lulled by the white noise of crashing waves and the rustle of wind-blown branches, not expecting that her dreams would betray the quietness of her waking life. In the dream, she stood barefoot in a fog-drenched field where the sky bled shades of indigo and crimson, and everything smelled faintly of lavender and old rain. The man appeared suddenly, at first just a silhouette etched against the unnatural twilight, tall and motionless, with a presence that throbbed in her chest like a forgotten heartbeat. His face was partly shadowed, but his eyes gleamed silver-blue like moonlight on steel, and when he spoke, it was not in words but in thoughts that echoed within her mind. "I've been waiting, Liora." She had never seen him before, and yet his voice felt as familiar as her own. Each time she asked who he was, the world would ripple like disturbed water, and he would smile with a sorrowful gentleness that only deepened the mystery. The dream ended as suddenly as it began, always at the same moment, with him reaching out to touch her hand and her waking up gasping just before their skin met. At first, she brushed it off as coincidence, some fleeting phantom conjured by stress or loneliness, the way dreams sometimes borrow from forgotten films or strangers glimpsed in passing. But the dream returned the next night, and the next, each time revealing a little more: the crumbled ruins in the field, the hint of a melody humming beneath the earth, the strange symbol carved into the stone at her feet. She began to dread sleep and crave it at the same time, caught in the addictive gravity of a mystery that seemed to deepen with every slumber. The man would be there without fail, always waiting at the center of the field like a lighthouse in a storm, and each night he would say something different that felt like a puzzle piece. "You promised you'd come back. Do you remember the fire? It's almost time." Her days began to blur, colored by insomnia and obsession, as she scribbled notes into a leather-bound journal the moment she awoke, drawings of the stone ruin, bits of dialogue, rough sketches of his face. She stopped going out, forgot to answer texts, let dishes pile in the sink. Her friends thought she was spiraling again, as she had once after the accident that took her parents, but Liora knew this was different. It didn't feel like grief, it felt like an invitation. She tested the boundaries of the dream like a scientist in a surreal experiment. She went to bed earlier, tried lucid dreaming, even whispered questions aloud before falling asleep to see if they would carry over. Sometimes he answered. One night, she asked, "What are you?" And he replied, "Not a ghost." "Not anymore." Another time she demanded, "Why me?" And he simply said, "Because we've done this before." On the sixth night, he took her hand before she could wake, and everything changed. A searing warmth shot through her arm, and she could see flashes: two figures dancing under candlelight, a ship burning on an endless sea, a name carved into wood, Cashin. She awoke screaming, heart racing, her arm tingling like it had touched fire, but there were no marks on her skin. And yet, when she looked in the mirror, she could swear the woman staring back at her was not quite the same. Her eyes looked older, stormier, and her breath fogged the glass like it did in the dream. The symbol from the ruin began appearing in strange places. In her tea leaves, in the way raindrops clung to her window, once even in the condensation on her bathroom mirror. She began to feel watched, not in a threatening way, but like the dream world was bleeding into reality, like Cashin's eyes were on her even when she was awake. When she walked past strangers, some of them looked at her a beat too long, with vague recognition or unsettled confusion, as if they were dream fragments too. Her heart would leap every time the doorbell rang or her phone buzzed, irrationally expecting him to be there. Her therapist suggested grounding techniques, but nothing grounded her anymore. The line between sleep and wakefulness had thinned to a thread. The dream evolved into something more, a place, a recurring location with fixed geography, as real and predictable as her own town. She knew where the broken bridge lay, how the wind always came from the east, and that the willow tree in the north corner dropped golden leaves when he was near. One night, instead of standing in the field, he met her on the edge of a cliff overlooking a sea of stars, and when she asked why he was showing her these places, he whispered, "Because they're pieces of us. You buried them long ago." The dream was not a story but a reclamation, a recovery of something ancient and fragmented. And then came the night that terrified her more than all others, not because it was horrifying, but because it felt so utterly real. They stood by the ruin, and he leaned in, pressing his forehead against hers. His breath was warm, his skin textured and solid, and she could feel the thrum of a pulse beneath his fingertips. He whispered her name like a vow, like a secret, like a sorrow. Then he said, "Soon, you'll remember everything, and I will come for you." She woke to find the exact words written in the margin of her journal, in handwriting that wasn't hers. The day after the journal incident, Liora sat at her kitchen table staring at the unfamiliar handwriting, trying to convince herself there was a logical explanation. Sleepwriting, maybe, or some odd dissociative trick her brain was playing. But deep down, beneath the noise of rational thought, something older stirred, an intuition she couldn't shake. The words were written in ink she didn't own, the strokes elegant and deliberate, bearing flourishes like calligraphy from another century. She closed the journal with trembling fingers and scanned the room, suddenly hyper-aware of every creak, every shadow, every silence that lasted too long. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking, not out of fear, but anticipation, like she was teetering on the brink of a secret that the world wasn't ready to share with her yet. That morning, while sipping coffee she could barely taste, Liora caught a glimpse of something impossible, a figure in the reflection of the window, tall, motionless, watching. She spun around. No one. But when she looked back, the coffee mug had a ring beneath it, shaped like the symbol from her dream. It was no longer just about the dreams. Signs were leaking into the waking world with increasing boldness, weaving themselves into her daily life like threads of an invisible tapestry. At the bookstore, the clerk handed her a receipt with a quote at the bottom, "We return, not in body, but in longing." At the antique shop she visited impulsively one afternoon, she found a pendant shaped like the same swirling glyph from the dream, sitting in a glass display labeled "Unclaimed Memories, $1." She bought it with trembling hands. That night, she placed the pendant on her nightstand and woke up in the middle of the night to find it glowing faintly, humming with warmth. More peculiar things followed. The air around her attic seemed colder than the rest of the house, even though insulation had recently been installed. Her radio, left unplugged, started playing a song she'd never heard before, but whose melody echoed from her dreamscape. Her cat refused to go near the hallway mirror, hissing at it like it reflected something she couldn't see. She began writing down every anomaly, every strange occurrence, and the journal quickly filled with sketches, timestamps, and circled phrases. Attic colder again. Man in reflection. Dream symbol on tree bark. She started comparing her dream landscapes to real-world maps, and was shocked when she found uncanny resemblances between the cliffside in her dream and a remote part of the actual coast only 30 miles away. Desperate for clarity, she drove there one afternoon, navigating through backroads and unmarked turns with nothing but instinct guiding her. When she arrived, the cliff was there, exactly as she'd seen it. The same curvature of stone. The same gnarled tree growing at its edge. And beneath that tree, half buried in soil, she found a shard of ceramic painted with the glyph. Her breath caught in her throat. It was real. He was real. Or at least, something was. After that, reality began to split, not into chaos, but into something like a dual rhythm. There was the waking world, where people talked about weather and politics, and then there was his world, layered just beneath the surface like a second heartbeat. She'd hear whispers when no one was around, just barely audible, always her name, Liora. Street lamps flickered when she passed. People began acting strangely around her. A man on the train stared at her for too long, then abruptly stood and whispered, "You were supposed to stay asleep." A child at the grocery store pointed at her and said, "He's looking for you," before her mother yanked her away. Every sound, every coincidence, now felt coded, deliberate. She began seeing patterns in numbers, in timestamps, in the shapes of clouds, like the universe was writing to her in a language she had once known but long forgotten. She stopped telling friends about the dreams. They'd already grown distant, confused by her erratic messages and disappearances. Her social media turned silent. Her phone, once buzzing with calls and texts, felt like a relic from another life. Only the dreams, and Cashin, remained consistent. Every night he grew more vivid, more corporeal. She could hear the rustle of his coat when he walked. She could feel the wind shift as he approached. He began to speak longer, more cryptically, as if preparing her. "You're remembering faster now," he said one night beneath a sky that rained black feathers. "Soon the veil will break." When she asked what veil, he only said, "The one you chose to weave." Then she found the photograph. It was tucked behind a loose brick in her fireplace, an old sepia-toned image of a woman who looked exactly like her, standing beside a man with Cashin's eyes. On the back was scribbled a date, March 11th, 1872. Her heart stuttered. Was it a prank? An inheritance? A planted memory? But the more she stared, the more certain she became. This wasn't someone who merely resembled her. It was her. The same scar beneath the right brow, the same tilt in the smile. She took the photo to a historian at the university, disguising it as a fictional inspiration, and his response chilled her. Fascinating. This woman disappeared mysteriously. Vanished without a trace. Legend says she walked into the sea following a man no one else could see. The boundary between past and present crumbled. Dreams bled into memory. Memory bled into now. The symbol began appearing in nature, on tree bark, in the swirl of seashells, once in the frost on her bedroom window. The pendant she wore began pulsing at random times, especially when she stood near the attic. She began hearing music again, haunting notes that sounded like they belonged to a forgotten era. She played them on her old piano, and somehow her fingers knew the melody before her mind did. Cashin's voice began echoing in her waking mind, faint at first, but growing stronger. "The door is almost open," he whispered one morning as she watched a storm roll in from the sea. And when she looked into the mirror that day, really looked, her reflection was not alone. He was there behind her. And that night, the dream did not end with him vanishing. Instead, he took her hand fully, and for the first time, she did not wake. They stood side by side in front of a mirror made of starlight and water. "It's time," he said. And when she opened her eyes the next morning, she knew something was coming. Something that had waited lifetimes. The morning sky was bruised with storm clouds when Liora woke, the sound of distant thunder rolling across the coast like the voice of something ancient clearing its throat. Her dreams from the night before lingered like perfume, thick, intoxicating, and impossible to forget. Cashin had spoken with unusual urgency, telling her, "The line is thinnest when the sky weeps." She remembered standing beside him on the edge of a mirror lake, watching reflections of other lives ripple across its surface, each version of herself different, yet the same, a librarian in Prague, a painter in Florence, a soldier in a forgotten war, all with him by her side. She had awoken breathless, her fingers still tingling as though she had truly touched his skin. The air in the cottage felt charged, like static before lightning, and when she moved, the pendant around her neck vibrated faintly. Her cat, Nibs, refused to come near her, pacing in circles and letting out soft, warning meows, his eyes fixated on the front door. Then it happened. The doorbell rang. Once. Just once. The sound seemed to echo far longer than it should have, reverberating through the walls, vibrating the floorboards, and sinking into her bones. Liora froze. She hadn't had visitors in weeks, no deliveries, no friends, no reason for anyone to appear on her porch in the middle of a storm. Her breath caught in her throat. Slowly, she approached the door, her heart thudding so loudly she thought it might drown out the storm outside. She glanced through the peephole. He was there. Not a dream. Not a flicker. But him. Cashin. Standing on her doorstep as if it were the most natural thing in the world. No coat despite the rain, his dark clothes soaked, hair plastered to his forehead, and those unmistakable silver-blue eyes locked onto the door like he could see through it. She stumbled backward, unable to breathe. Her brain refused to catch up. How could he be real? She blinked hard, heart pounding, half expecting him to vanish the second she looked again. But he didn't. He stood there, waiting. Not knocking. Not pacing. Just waiting. As if he'd waited centuries and another minute wouldn't make a difference. Gathering every ounce of courage she had, Liora opened the door. The wind howled around them, lashing rain sideways, but within the threshold was a strange silence. He met her eyes and said softly, "Hello again." The words collapsed her world. Again. As if this was a reunion. She whispered, "Cashin," and he nodded like it was the only name he'd ever answered to. Her knees nearly gave out. She gripped the doorframe. "You're not real," she said. "You can't be real." His expression softened with something between sorrow and longing. "You've said that before," he replied. The rain didn't seem to touch him, even as it soaked her porch and streamed past his boots. He didn't ask to come in. He waited. She didn't know why, but she felt the rules hanging in the air, unspoken, ancient. She had to invite him. Swallowing her fear, she stepped aside. "Come in," she whispered. He crossed the threshold, and with him came a stillness, like time itself paused to watch. Up close, he was exactly as she remembered, but more solid, more here, like dream and reality had fused into one. His presence filled the room. Not just physically, but emotionally, as if every breath she took was drawn through his memory. He looked around the cottage with the faintest smile. "You always pick places near the sea," he said. She wanted to scream, to cry, to demand answers. But all she could do was stare. "How are you here?" she finally whispered. "I remember you. Only in dreams." Cashin stepped closer. Not too close, just enough. "That's because the boundary was still holding. But it's thinning now. You've been remembering." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of parchment, worn and damp but sealed with a mark that matched the glyph. She took it with trembling hands, the parchment strangely warm. Inside was a single sentence, written in the same calligraphy as her journal: "We return when the veil can no longer hold our names." Beneath it was a symbol she hadn't seen before, 2 interlocked circles, one black, one gold. "What does this mean?" she asked. He gazed at her as if every question she asked had already been answered 100 years ago. "It's our mark. The sign that we found each other in every life, no matter how far apart we began." She backed into the living room, the note clutched tightly. "I don't understand. Is this reincarnation? Time travel? Magic?" He laughed softly, the sound both ancient and alive. "Does it matter what word you give it? We've lived 1,000 names. We've worn 100 faces. But it's always been you and me." His certainty terrified her. Why now? Why this life? He looked out the rain-streaked window, expression turning grave. "Because something is coming. Something that always tries to separate us. You need to remember before it finds you." Liora felt the world spin. Her dreams had always ended before this point. She had never asked, "What comes after he arrives?" They sat across from each other in the flickering glow of candlelight, the storm outside raging as if protesting his presence. Cashin told her pieces of their shared pasts, lives lived in hidden cities, revolutions fought side by side, promises whispered at the edge of death. Each story ignited flashes in her memory, half-formed images, scents, tears she didn't understand. Her body remembered before her mind did. Her heartbeat aligned with his. She asked for proof, and he placed her hand against his chest. "You already know," he whispered. "You've always known." Hours passed without time being felt. The wind howled and then faded. The fire crackled. Outside, the sky began to clear. And then, before he left that night, because he said he had to leave, just for now, he paused at the door. "You still have the mirror, don't you?" he asked. Her breath caught. She nodded. "The one in the attic." He smiled faintly. "It's not a mirror, Liora. It's a gate. And when you're ready, I'll meet you on the other side." She didn't sleep that night. She couldn't. Not out of fear, but because everything had changed. He was no longer a dream. He had stood at her door. And the next time, she would be the one walking through it. The day after Cashin's visit, Liora found herself drifting through her own home like a guest in a sacred space, every object suddenly charged with the possibility of memory. She couldn't focus on anything but the conversation they'd shared, the stories he'd told, and the lingering echo of his presence in the air, as if the very molecules of her cottage still remembered him. Her fingertips brushed over the seal on the parchment again and again, its texture oddly smooth and warm like living skin. The phrase haunted her, "We return when the veil can no longer hold our names." Names. Plural. Liora Marin. Cashin Vare. Had they worn those names before? Or were they merely the latest masks for souls playing out a 1,000-year romance across time's mirror? She spent the morning digging through boxes in her attic, searching not just for the mirror he'd mentioned, but for clues, evidence, artifacts, anything to prove she wasn't dreaming with her eyes open. What she found stopped her breath. At the bottom of an old trunk, beneath moth-eaten quilts and brittle photographs, was a leather-bound book. The cover bore a sun and moon sigil. The pages were filled with entries, in her handwriting. But they weren't hers. Not this life's, at least. The ink was faded, the grammar old-fashioned, the language a strange blend of poetic prose and urgency. She flipped through page after page, heart racing as she read entries dated in the 1700s, the 1400s, the early 1900s. Each one began the same way: "If I forget again, let this remind me." They told stories, fragmented, mythic, visceral. A tower in Spain where a woman leapt to her death to avoid being married off to a tyrant. A man who stormed a winter castle alone, armed with nothing but a sword and a ring. A barn burned down in Salem, two lovers executed side by side for crimes no one could prove. It was like reading a novel that knew too much about her dreams. Each entry ended with a signature, Liora. And nearly everyone mentioned him, Cashin. The ink grew frantic in later entries. "They always find us. We always lose each other. I keep forgetting." By evening, Cashin returned. This time, he knocked once, then entered without a word when she opened the door. His eyes were shadowed but gentle, like he'd carried a great burden just to make it here. He sat across from her in the attic, next to the old mirror he had once called a gate. Its surface looked ordinary, dull glass framed in tarnished brass, but under candlelight the reflection shimmered faintly like water under moonlight. "Tell me everything," she whispered. "No riddles. Just truth." He nodded and began. They were not ordinary humans, not entirely. They were remnants, echoes, of something older. Once, long ago, they had made a vow beneath a bleeding sky to never let time or death sever them. That vow had consequences. "We interfered with the natural order," he said. "And the order struck back. We were cursed to forget, to be reborn apart, always searching, always almost finding each other. Each life, they would be drawn to the same places, mirrors, thresholds, moments of déjà vu, and if the timing was right, they would remember. But remembering came at a cost. The more you remember, Cashin said, the thinner the veil becomes. And when it breaks, others can come through. Liora frowned. Others? He hesitated. Not all that dwell between lives are kind. She shivered. What happened to us before? He leaned forward. In our first life, we defied a king. In our second, we tried to rewrite fate. In our third, you died saving me. And in every life since, we've tried to undo what we did then. His voice cracked. But the universe doesn't forget. It remembers debts. He pulled out a locket, a silver teardrop that opened to reveal a tiny portrait of her, painted in oils, a version of her in Renaissance clothing. "This is from Florence," he said. "You painted this. You told me if I ever found you again, I'd know by the way your eyes curved when you laughed." Liora stared at it, overwhelmed. "I don't remember painting that," she whispered. He smiled softly. "Not yet. But you will." He asked if she still had the scar on her shoulder. She blinked. "How do you know about that?" He replied, "Because I gave it to you in 1841. A duel. You stepped in front of me." She touched the faint crescent mark just beneath her collarbone and suddenly felt the searing burn of a blade, the roar of a crowd, the warmth of Cashin's hands pressing down, screaming her name. The memory vanished like breath on glass. She looked up, trembling. "I felt it." "Yes," he said. "It's starting." He stood and moved to the mirror. "This is the last gate. Once we pass through, there's no turning back. You'll see everything. Feel everything. You'll remember." She hesitated. "And what then?" Cashin didn't answer at first. Then he said, "Then we decide if we're strong enough to rewrite the ending." That night, they lit candles around the mirror. He taught her phrases in a language she didn't recognize, but her tongue somehow remembered. They meditated. They whispered old names. The mirror rippled once, like a pond disturbed by an unseen hand. Liora felt something stir inside her. Images. Faces. Screams. Kisses. Blood. Bells tolling at midnight. Then silence. They didn't step through. "Not yet," Cashin said. "One more night. To be sure." Liora nodded. Her head felt full of bees and music. That night she dreamed again, but this time she didn't dream of Cashin. She dreamed as if she was him. A man standing on a battlefield. A lover in his arms. The moment her heart stopped. When she woke, she whispered his name. Cashin. He was already there beside her bed, eyes full of centuries. "I saw it," she said. "I saw you." He took her hand. "Then we're ready." But before they could open the gate, something knocked from the other side of the mirror. The knock came softly at first, so faint it could have been the house settling or a distant branch brushing against the glass. But then it came again. Louder. 3 deliberate taps that seemed to echo not only through the attic, but deep within Liora's chest, like a second heartbeat out of sync with her own. She and Cashin froze, staring at the mirror, its surface now dark and undulating like ink beneath water. "That's not supposed to happen," Cashin murmured. The air turned sharp, like ozone after lightning. The candles flickered and one by one extinguished, plunging the attic into a trembling half-light. Liora took a step back. "What's on the other side?" she whispered. Cashin's jaw tensed. It could be a memory, or it could be them, the ones that followed us through time. He reached out, not touching the glass, but hovering just close enough that his fingertips seemed to shimmer. "They're always drawn to the opening." Despite the fear twisting in her gut, Liora stepped beside him. We need to go through, don't we? Cashin nodded slowly. If we don't, they might come out. That was enough. Liora tightened her grip on the pendant around her neck and braced herself. Cashin began reciting the incantation again, this time faster, each word sounding like thunder spoken backwards. The glass shimmered, then parted like a curtain made of smoke. And beyond it, light. Not white or golden, but silver, like moonlight on water, soft and beckoning. "Stay close to me," he said. "No matter what you see." Together, they stepped forward, and were swallowed whole. Crossing into the mirror realm was like slipping between thoughts. There was no clear boundary, no door or tunnel, just a sudden change of everything. Liora found herself standing in a vast expanse where nothing obeyed the logic of the waking world. The sky pulsed with moving constellations that whispered as they shifted. The ground beneath her feet was glassy but soft, reflecting her own face at strange angles, like a puzzle constantly reassembling. Time didn't seem to exist here. The air was filled with music made of sighs and forgotten dreams. Cashin took her hand, grounding her. "This is the realm between lives," he said, "where memory lives after death and before rebirth. It's not meant to be walked while living, but we're exceptions." As they moved deeper into the realm, structures began to rise around them, ruins of places Liora recognized from her dreams and journal sketches. A tower with ivy crawling backwards. A garden where all the flowers bloomed in reverse. A carousel frozen mid-spin with shadowy figures frozen in laughter. "Every life leaves a trace here," Cashin explained. "The stronger the bond, the clearer the echo." Leora's breath caught as they passed a small bridge, exactly like the one from her dream, weathered wood, carved initials, L+C. She reached out and touched it, and a memory hit her like a wave. She was younger, laughing, running across the bridge as Cashin chased her, the air smelling of spring rain and cinnamon. The joy was so sharp it hurt. She pulled back, tears in her eyes. "I remember that day." Cashin nodded. "We lived that life in 1832. Further in, they reached a lake made of glass, and across its surface danced moving images, scenes from every lifetime they had shared. Some were beautiful, a wedding under lanterns, a kiss in the snow, a child being born. Others were tragic, Cashin hanging from a tree, Liora burning at the stake, wars, floods, plagues. Each memory flickered for only a few seconds, but the emotions attached to them were overwhelming. Liora staggered, collapsing to her knees. "It's too much," she gasped. Cashin knelt beside her, his hands framing her face. "We're almost at the center. That's where the core memory is, the one we need to rewrite." Liora blinked through the tears. "Why me? Why now?" He pressed his forehead to hers. "Because in this life, you're ready to remember without breaking." They moved on. At the center of the realm stood a mirror. Not just any mirror, but the first. Tall, ancient, and cracked through the middle like a wound. "This is where it began," Cashin said. "The original vow. The first memory. The first betrayal." Liora stared at it, her reflection fractured into hundreds of versions, some weeping, others smiling, a few screaming in rage. "What do I do?" she asked. He stepped back. "Only you can open it. Only you can face it." Her hands trembled as she approached. The pendant glowed brightly now, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. She pressed it to the mirror's surface. The crack shimmered, and suddenly the mirror filled with a memory, a scene she didn't recognize but instinctively knew. She was standing on a cliff. Cashin was beside her. Below them, an army advanced, torches, horns, a king's men. They had betrayed the throne, defied the gods, stolen something sacred. In that life, they had made a choice, to preserve their love over everything else. It had unleashed a curse that fractured time itself. "We did this," Liora whispered. "We chose love over order." Cashin stood behind her, watching. And we've paid the price in every life since. The scene dissolved. The mirror now shimmered with choice. Liora looked at Cashin. Can we undo it? He stepped beside her. We can try. But first, you must forgive the version of you that made that choice. Only then can we rewrite the vow. Her heart ached. To let go of guilt so old it lived in her soul's bones. She touched the mirror again and whispered, I forgive her. A ripple spread through the realm like light across a pool. The cracked mirror sealed itself. The ground beneath them shifted. The sky darkened. And something howled in the distance. Cashin went pale. They felt that. They know we're trying to change the pattern. From the far end of the realm, a shadow began to move, slow, massive, sentient. We have to go, he said. Now. As they turned to flee, the realm began to collapse behind them. Dreams unraveled. Reflections shattered. And in the chaos, Liora saw a vision of herself, older, wiser, standing at the edge of a world that hadn't yet formed. That version of her smiled and said, It's not the end, it's the unbreaking. With Cashin's hand in hers, she ran through the collapsing world of memory and pain. The mirror they had entered through began to glow, a beacon in the storm. And as they stepped through, together, Liora carried with her something new, hope. They stumbled through the mirror and collapsed onto the attic floor, gasping for breath like divers breaking the surface after plunging too deep. The air in the real world was sharp and cold, full of dust and wood smoke, but it felt solid, real, in a way the mirror realm never had. Liora's fingers were scraped from where she'd clawed at broken reflections during their escape, and Cashin was pale, shaken, his eyes flickering like candlelight in a draught. We shouldn't have stayed that long, he murmured, wiping blood from his lip. But you did it. You found the first memory. You forgave her. Liora nodded slowly, the weight of what she had seen clinging to her like a second skin. The cliff, the army, the vow, it wasn't just some symbolic dream. It was history. Their history. They had broken the world once in the name of love, and the universe had been unmaking and remaking them ever since. But as the hours passed, Liora began to feel unsteady. Her hands trembled even at rest, and her thoughts flickered with strange intrusions, sights and sounds that didn't belong to this life. She saw flashes of cities she had never visited, a golden palace where guards in armor bowed to her, a stone cell where she sang lullabies to someone dying on the floor. At first, she thought they were just memories surfacing too fast. But some were wrong. Warped. Contorted. In one, Cashin stood before her, but his eyes were empty, his voice cruel, saying things he never would. In another, she watched herself stabbing him through the heart. These aren't our lives, she whispered aloud. Cashin looked at her with alarm. They're not echoes, he said. They're shadows. He explained that the mirror realm, in granting her full access to her past selves, had also reopened the door to fragments, splinters of failed timelines, regrets, corrupted versions of who they might have become. The more you remember, the thinner the veil gets between what was and what could have been, he said. The fractured past is always trying to rewrite the present. Liora's dreams turned violent. One night, she woke up screaming, her hands stained with ink that hadn't been there before. Another night, the reflection in her bathroom mirror turned away from her on its own, even though she hadn't moved. Nibs hissed at her constantly now, hiding beneath furniture and refusing to eat. Something had followed them back through the mirror. Or some version of them. She and Cashin began to search for a way to seal the breach fully. The parchment he'd given her days ago now glowed faintly along its edges, as if burning through time itself. On the reverse, words had appeared in her own handwriting. The seal must be made with blood remembered and name reclaimed. What does that mean? She asked. Cashin hesitated. It means, we have to finish what we started. He led her to a forgotten chapel on the cliffs, a place they had once found in another life, a sacred ground where time bent more easily. It was abandoned now, its stained glass windows cracked, its altar covered in dust and ivy. But as they stepped inside, the air stilled, and the pendant around Leora's neck began to glow like fire caught in crystal. She walked to the altar, where her name had once been carved, Liora Estelle of the 14th seal. Suddenly, visions poured into her, so many lives, so many names, all of them her, stacked on top of one another like books in a burning library. She saw the face of a child she once lost. The moment she first kissed Cashin in a garden of stars. A time when she betrayed him to save him. And deeper still, the original self, the girl who had made the vow beneath that bleeding sky, who had defied kings and gods not out of arrogance, but out of love. Liora fell to her knees, sobbing with the force of memory. "I remember it all," she choked out. "All the ways we've died. All the ways we tried to find each other again." Cashin knelt beside her. "Then we can finish it." They performed the ritual as twilight painted the sky in indigo and fire. She pricked her finger and let her blood touch the seal carved into the altar. Cashin spoke the old words, the ones their first selves had once whispered in rebellion. "We reclaim what we lost. We return what was borrowed. We unbind what was cursed." But as the final syllable left his mouth, the wind outside howled like an animal, and the air inside the chapel turned black. A shadow emerged, not a figure, but a mass, like grief made solid. "The fracture fights back," Cashin said, shielding Liora as the thing roared. "It knows we're trying to change the story." The shadow took on forms, versions of Liora screaming, accusing, dying. "You broke the world for him," one hissed. "And you'll do it again." She stood, trembling but firm. "I remember you," she said. "You're every version of me that lost hope. But I'm not you anymore." The shadows writhed, shrieked, and tried to tear her away from the altar. But Cashin reached out, his hand on her heart. "Your name is your anchor," he said. "Say it." She took a breath, and then with the strength of 10 lifetimes, she declared, "I am Liora Estelle. I remember who I am." The wind stopped. The darkness recoiled. The seal blazed with light, and the chapel trembled. The fracture sealed with a sound like thunder cracking through marble. The shadows vanished. The silence that followed was absolute. Cashin staggered, exhausted. Liora helped him up. "Is it done?" she asked. "The past." He gave her a tired smile. "It's not hunting us anymore." She looked around. The chapel was still broken, still abandoned, but it felt clean. Light filtered through the glass like forgiveness. For the first time in centuries, Liora felt like herself. Whole. But just as they were about to leave, a wind swept through the chapel again, gentle this time, but insistent. At the altar, a new inscription had appeared beneath her name. "One vow remains to be rewritten." Cashin read it aloud and turned to her. "There's one more life," he said. "One more choice." She stared at the horizon, the sky beginning to lighten. The past was no longer fractured, but the future had yet to be made. They returned from the chapel just before dawn, their bodies weary but their spirits, finally, unburdened by centuries of confusion and grief. Liora stood at the edge of the cliff behind her cottage, watching the sun begin to rise over the sea, casting the world in hues of rose and amber. For the first time in a long time, the ocean didn't seem to whisper her name. It simply existed, calm and endless, like it had been waiting for her to find peace. Cashin joined her silently, his coat billowing in the morning wind. Neither of them spoke for a while. They didn't need to. So much had already been said across time, whispered in dreams and carved in blood. "So," she said at last, "what now?" He turned to her, eyes filled with quiet gravity. "Now you choose." The weight of those 3 words settled over her like a crown. The ritual at the chapel had sealed the fracture, closed the breach that had haunted them through lifetimes, but it had also awakened the final thread of their original vow, the one they made under a blood moon, when they had chosen to bind their souls together, no matter the cost. That vow, ancient and cosmic, had sustained their connection but also fueled the curse. The vow is still intact, Cashin explained, which means we're still trapped in the cycle. Liora felt it too. That low hum in her bones. That ache in her heart. The tether between them wasn't just emotional. It was metaphysical, a force of memory and desire twisted into permanence. "So we're still not free," she said softly. Cashin reached for her hand. "Unless we choose to unbind." The idea hit her like a wave of cold water. Unbind. Let go. Cut the cord. "But if we do that, won't we lose each other?" she asked. "Won't we forget?" He nodded. "Maybe. Maybe not. But we won't be trapped." She turned to face him fully, her hand tightening around his. "So what's the other option?" Cashin hesitated. "We can bind again. Willingly. Knowing everything this time. Not out of desperation, but out of clarity." Her breath caught. "Another vow. A new one," he said. "Not forged in rebellion or fear. One born from choice. From love that doesn't need eternity to be real." The wind picked up, rustling the pendant around her neck. It glowed one final time and then went dark. Its purpose had been fulfilled. The moment of decision had arrived. Inside the cottage, the mirror stood untouched. But its surface shimmered faintly now, not from magic, but memory. Liora walked to it and saw not just a reflection, but every version of herself layered behind her. The painter. The soldier. The librarian. The witch. The girl who had once vowed to fight the stars to be with the man she loved. They were all silent now, watching. Waiting. She placed her hand on the glass. "If I break the vow," she whispered, "I give them up." Cashin stood behind her, his reflection touching hers. "And if you make the new one, you begin again. Together." She turned. "What about the other lives?" He shook his head. "No more lives. No more echoes. Just this one. One lifetime. One chance." The thought was terrifying in its simplicity. After so many cycles, the idea of being limited to one lifetime, no promises of reunion, no cosmic safeguards, felt like stepping off a ledge with no promise of wings. But wasn't that what love really was? Not a guarantee, but a leap? She closed her eyes and pictured the cliff, the wedding under lanterns, the last kiss before execution. Every moment they had shared across time, beautiful and painful. And then she pictured now, the softness of the dawn, the salt in the air, Cashin's heartbeat near hers. A real moment. A mortal one. "I want this life," she said. "This one. With you. No cycles. No fate. Just us." Cashin smiled, and for the first time in all the versions she remembered of him, he looked relieved. "Then say the words," he whispered. They stood before the mirror, and together they recited the new vow, not from a book, not from a spell, but from the marrow of their souls. "I choose this life," she began. "Not for always. Not for eternity. But for now." Cashin followed. "I choose you, not through time, but through choice. Through presence. Through love that does not demand forever." As they spoke, the mirror began to crack, not shatter, but fracture like old glass finally releasing what it had held too tightly. The light in the room shifted, grew warmer. The air lost its weight. The old vow dissolved like smoke. The bond remained, but changed. No longer a chain. No longer a curse. Just connection. Liora fell into Cashin's arms, both of them laughing and crying at once. The storm that had followed them for lifetimes was finally gone. Outside, the first rays of sunlight bathed the sea in gold. "So this is it?" she asked. "We just live now?" He nodded. "We wake up. We live. We argue about dishes and taxes and what kind of dog we want. She laughed. "We hate taxes." "I know," he grinned. "You've hated them in at least 7 lifetimes." They left the attic. The mirror remained, but its surface was calm, reflecting only what was real. They made breakfast together. Nibs, the cat, finally approached Cashin and rubbed against his leg, purring. Outside, neighbors walked their dogs. The world was ordinary, and for the first time in centuries, that felt extraordinary. They had chosen each other not because of destiny, but despite it. Liora no longer needed dreams to find him. He was here. She was awake. And for once, that was enough. The following weeks unfolded like a dream that no longer needed to end. The silence in the house had changed, no longer heavy or haunted, but gentle, restful, full of the kind of peace that came after surviving a storm. Liora awoke beside Cashin every morning to the ordinary magic of real life, the sound of gulls overhead, the scent of coffee brewing, the feel of his fingers brushing hers across the kitchen table. There were no more mirror ripples, no strange dreams, no ghosts peering through the walls of memory. The mirror in the attic had gone still and cold, its surface now just that, glass. Liora sometimes visited it anyway, not in fear, but out of respect. She would stand before it and smile, remembering not what was lost, but what had been reclaimed. She knew now that time did not heal all things, it simply gave you the chance to. Cashin adjusted too. He no longer spoke in riddles or watched shadows out of habit. He learned how to fold laundry again, how to burn pancakes, how to argue about grocery lists with a grin. But sometimes, only sometimes, she caught him staring out at the ocean with an expression that held centuries behind it. And in those moments, Liora would go to him and hold his hand, silently reminding him that this life was real, and that the present was something worth staying in. The vow they had made, fragile and human, proved stronger than the ancient one that had cursed them. They had built something here, day by day. Not from fate, but from laughter, stubbornness, compassion, and the shared knowledge of everything they had been. But as the equinox approached, Liora noticed subtle shifts. The wind off the sea carried old echoes. Her dreams were quiet, but not empty. Now they were filled with new things, the future, possibilities. Children's names she and Cashin hadn't spoken aloud yet. A house surrounded by rosemary bushes. A dog named Clover. Then one evening, while cleaning out the attic for good, she found a new letter tucked inside the base of the mirror. It was folded into a triangle, sealed with wax that shimmered like starlight. She stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside it read, "You've done it. But the story doesn't end here. You've only broken the cycle. What you do next decides whether the door closes or opens forever." She sat on the floor for a long time after reading it, the late afternoon light streaming through the attic window in golden slants. The question echoed in her mind. What does it mean for a door to stay open? Was it about more than her and Cashin? Had they simply been the first to remember? Were there others still trapped in echoes and half-dreams? Cashin joined her, reading the letter over her shoulder. "It could be a warning," he said. "Or a calling." Liora looked into his eyes. "Do we open the door for others?" He tilted his head. "Only if they're ready. Like you were." They sat there in the stillness, two souls who had run through centuries now resting in the quiet of a single, chosen moment. Later that week, they invited friends over, real, present friends who'd thought Liora had simply gone through a rough patch. No one asked about her strange retreat from the world. They only noticed how radiant she seemed, how deeply her laughter rang, how she and Cashin moved together like music and lyrics long separated and finally reunited. They hosted dinners, adopted a dog, walked the cliffside at dusk. Liora planted rosemary by the windowsill. Sometimes they passed other people who stared a little too long, looked a little too familiar, as if they, too, were on the edge of remembering. And Liora would nod at them softly, not in confirmation, but in invitation. One rainy night, Cashin found her back in the attic, staring at the mirror. "Thinking of reopening it?" he asked with a teasing smile. She shook her head. "Just remembering." He sat beside her. "You know," he said, "when you first dreamed of me, I was terrified." She blinked. "You?" He nodded. "Because I thought maybe you'd forget again. That I'd lose you all over." She took his hand. "And now," he said, "I know if I ever lose you again, you'll find me. Maybe not in dreams. Maybe not in this life. But you will." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Let's not wait 1,000 years next time." They never fully closed the mirror. They didn't need to. It remained still, covered with a linen cloth, not as a relic, but as a reminder. A memory they no longer had to live in. Life moved forward. Quietly. Beautifully. The stories they had carried for centuries became stories they could finally let go of, not erased, but transformed. The past was no longer a chain. The future was no longer a fog. And the present was everything. One morning, Liora stood by the door, watching the sun rise as Cashin poured coffee behind her. The scent of rosemary drifted through the air. She turned to him, smiling, and said, "You know, in every lifetime, I think I always wanted this the most." "What's that?" he asked. She walked over, pressed a kiss to his cheek, and whispered, "To wake up with you, and not have to say goodbye." Outside, the sea shimmered. Inside, their hands intertwined. And somewhere deep in the layers of the world, another door opened, not one that led to escape, but to belonging. Because the door never really closed. It simply waited, quietly, patiently, for those brave enough to walk through it wide awake. Thank you for diving into our incredible stories. If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more adventures. This is just the beginning. There's so much more to come.